The office was silent, the kind of eerie stillness that made you feel like something was about to snap. I sat at my desk, staring at the resignation letter on my screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. My heart pounded in my chest, a mixture of fear and exhilaration flooding through me. For 5 years, I had given everything to Wellington Enterprises. Late nights, early mornings, skipped vacations. Every ounce of my energy poured into making this company a success. But none of it had ever been enough. Not for Damien Wellington, the CEO. He was ruthless. A man whose expectations were impossibly high, whose temper was a ticking time bomb, always waiting for the smallest mistake to detonate. To the world, he was a visionary, a genius who built an empire from the ground up. But behind closed doors he was something else entirely. Calculating. Manipulative. And I had suffered enough. I clicked print, watching as my resignation letter slid out of the printer, crisp and final. My hands shook slightly as I grabbed the paper and made my way to his office. Damien's office loomed at the end of the hallway, the massive oak doors an imposing barrier between him and the rest of the world. I took a deep breath, steadied myself and knocked. "Enter," his voice commanded from the other side. I stepped inside, the room swallowing me in its vastness. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline, his massive mahogany desk polished to perfection. Damien sat behind it, clad in a tailored black suit, his piercing blue eyes lifting from his laptop to meet mine. For a moment I hesitated. Those eyes had a way of making you second-guess yourself, of making you feel small. But not this time. I set the letter down in front of him. "I'm resigning." His expression remained unreadable as he picked up the letter, scanning it with a slow, deliberate gaze. The silence stretched, suffocating. Then finally he looked up. "No." I blinked. "What?" "No," he repeated, setting the letter down. "You're not resigning." A humorless laugh escaped me. "Damien, this isn't a request. I'm leaving." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like a predator sizing up its prey. "And where exactly do you think you're going?" "That doesn't concern you." His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Everything about you concerns me, Amelia." I swallowed hard, hating the way my name sounded when he said it, the way it carried an undercurrent of something dangerous. "I've given you 5 years of my life. I'm done." His fingers tapped against the desk, his gaze never leaving mine. "And yet you think you can just walk away?" I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you really think I'd let you go that easily?" A chill ran down my spine. "You have no say in this," I shot back. "I'm leaving whether you like it or not." For the first time his expression shifted. Something dark flickered in his eyes, something possessive. "We'll see about that," he murmured. By the time I stepped out of his office, my hands were trembling. I had done it. I had finally taken control of my life. Or so I thought. That night I received an email from HR. My resignation had been rejected. Rejected. I stormed back into the office the next morning, fury bubbling beneath my skin. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, slamming my phone down on Damien's desk, the rejection email glaring up from the screen. Damien barely looked up from his paperwork. "You signed a contract when you joined this company, Amelia. You can't just walk away without consequences." My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" His eyes flicked to mine, his gaze smug. "You agreed to a non-compete clause. If you leave, you won't be able to work in this industry for 3 years. Anywhere." My blood ran cold. He smirked. "So unless you want to throw your entire career away, I suggest you reconsider." Rage burned through me. "You planned this." He shrugged. "I simply ensured that you wouldn't be able to betray me." I clenched my fist. "This isn't over." He leaned back, his smirk widening. "I was hoping you'd say that." I turned on my heel and stormed out. But as I walked away, I could still feel his eyes on me, watching, waiting. And that's when I realized, this wasn't just about me quitting. This was a war. And Damien Wellington had just declared it. I left Damien's office that morning with my mind spinning. The non-compete clause. The smug look in his eyes. The way he had leaned back in his chair like he had already won. I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. I had worked too hard to let one man hold my future hostage. But as the reality of my situation set in, doubt started creeping in. Damien was powerful. Ruthless. And now he had turned his sights on me. I spent the next few days trying to find a way around the contract. I reached out to lawyers, HR specialists, anyone who might help me break free. But every door slammed shut. The contract was airtight. If I tried to work in the same industry, I could be sued for everything I had. And even if I left the country, Damien had connections everywhere. I was trapped. But I refused to let him see me break. So I kept showing up at work, pretending like nothing had changed, pretending like I wasn't planning my escape. Then the sabotage began. It started small, important emails disappearing, meetings rescheduled without my knowledge. But then it got worse. One morning I walked into my office to find my entire team staring at me. Their expressions were unreadable. "What's going on?" I asked, setting down my bag. No one answered. Then my assistant, Sophie, hesitated before handing me a printed email. My blood ran cold as I read it. It was an email from my account, sent to the board. It accused Damien of financial fraud, of embezzlement, of crimes that could ruin him. The only problem? I never sent it. A slow, sinking feeling settled in my stomach. This was him. Damien had set me up. I turned on my heel and stormed into his office without knocking. He was waiting. "You look upset," he said, not even bothering to hide the amusement in his voice. I threw the paper on his desk. "Fix this." He picked it up, scanning it with mock interest. "Oh dear, Amelia. It looks like you've been very, very bad." My jaw clenched. "You did this." He tilted his head. "Now why would I do that?" "Because you want to ruin me." He leaned forward, his gaze locking onto mine. "If I wanted to ruin you, Amelia, you'd already be finished." I hated the way he said my name. I hated that he was right. I clenched my fist. "This won't work. I'll clear my name." His smirk didn't falter. "I have no doubt that you will. But while you're busy defending yourself, you'll be exactly where I want you, stuck." Rage flared in my chest. "You're a monster." He stood, slowly circling the desk until he was right in front of me. Too close. "I'm a businessman," he murmured. "And you, Amelia, made the mistake of thinking you could walk away from me." I refused to back down. "You won't win." His fingers brushed against my arm just enough to make me shiver. "I already have." I yanked away from his touch and stormed out. But the moment I was alone, I collapsed into my chair, my heart pounding. I was running out of options. And worse, I was starting to realize just how far Damien was willing to go to keep me under his control. The next few weeks were hell. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some people believed the fake email. Others didn't. But the damage was done. My reputation was in question. And Damien? He thrived on it. He walked through the office like a king, always watching, always waiting. Then one night everything changed. I was working late, trying to fix the mess he had created when my office door opened. I looked up, expecting Sophie. It was Damien. He closed the door behind him, the lock clicking into place. "What do you want?" asked my voice cold. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to my desk, placing a single sheet of paper in front of me. I frowned, picking it up. It was a contract. A new contract. I scanned the words, my heart racing. No non-compete. No legal ties. Freedom. "What is this?" I asked, suspicious. His gaze burned into mine. "A way out." I swallowed. "You're just letting me go?" "No," he said smoothly. "I'm giving you an alternative." I knew better than to trust him. "What's the catch?" A slow smirk spread across his face. You belong to me. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I shook my head. No. Think about it, he murmured. You can fight me. Keep struggling. Or, he stepped closer, his voice dropping. You can make this easy. Sign the contract. And be mine. My breath hitched. Be yours. I repeated. His fingers traced the edge of the paper. In every way that matters. I clenched my jaw. I'd rather burn this entire company to the ground. His smirk deepened. Now that's the fire I like. I glared at him. Get out. He leaned down, his lips just inches from my ear. You'll come to me, Amelia. Eventually. Then just like that he was gone. Leaving me alone with a contract that could set me free. If I was willing to give up everything else. I didn't sign the contract. Instead I fought harder. But Damien didn't back down. Every time I made progress he found another way to pull me back. He kept me under his thumb, playing his twisted game, watching as I struggled. And the worst part? The longer I was trapped in this war with him, the more I realized that a part of me was drawn to the fire. Drawn to him. I hated him. But God help me, I felt him. Every glance. Every smirk. Every time he cornered me, his voice low and taunting. It was a battle I wasn't sure I could win. Because as much as I wanted to destroy him, part of me wanted something else just as much. And that terrified me more than anything. The contract sat on my desk like a loaded gun. It was everything I wanted. An escape, a chance to be free of Damien Wellington. And yet it was poisoned with his terms. A contract that didn't bind me legally, but bound me to him in every other way. For days I avoided him. I focused on my work, pretended not to notice when he passed by my office, pretended not to feel the weight of his gaze on me. But Damien wasn't the type to be ignored. And soon I realized he was just getting started. The sabotage escalated. First it was my projects being reassigned. Then my team was split apart, scattered across different departments. Damien was cutting off my power, isolating me. But I refused to break. I met every challenge, every obstacle with a fire that refused to die. Then one night he pushed too far. I was the last one in the office finishing a report when my computer screen suddenly flickered. A notification popped up. Access denied. Frowning, I tried again. My files were gone. Every document, every piece of work I had done over the past year. Erased. My blood ran cold. A slow clap echoed from the doorway. I turned. Damien stood there, leaning against the doorframe, his smirk infuriatingly smug. Looking for something? My heart pounded in my chest. You did this. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. You left me no choice. I gritted my teeth. This is insane. You can't just erase my work. He tilted his head. Why not? I clenched my fist. You can't keep doing this, Damien. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. And yet here you are. Still standing. Still fighting. I refuse to back down. Because I won't let you win. His eyes darkened. Amelia, he murmured, his voice smooth, dangerous. This isn't about winning. I swallowed hard. Then what is it about? His fingers brushed against my wrist, just a whisper of contact, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. You, he said simply. I pulled away. This is a game to you. He let out a low chuckle. Isn't everything? I hated him. Hated the way he toyed with me. Hated the way my body reacted when he was near. But most of all, I hated that he knew exactly what he was doing to me. I didn't sign his contract. But Damien didn't seem to care. The next week was a battlefield. Every time I tried to work, he found a way to interfere. Every time I tried to avoid him, he was there, watching, waiting, pushing. Then the gala happened. Wellington Enterprises' annual charity gala was the event of the year. High-profile investors, celebrities, and the elite of the business world all gathered in one place. And I had no choice but to be there. The moment I arrived, I felt his presence. Damien was across the room, dressed in a black suit, holding a glass of whiskey, watching me with that unreadable gaze. I tried to ignore him. I mingled, networked, smiled for the cameras. But no matter how far I moved, I could feel him. Then suddenly he was there. Behind me. Too close. "Enjoying yourself?" he murmured against my ear. I forced a smile, turning to face him. "Of course." His eyes flickered with amusement. "Liar." I took a step back. "If you'll excuse me." He caught my wrist. A subtle gesture. To anyone watching it looked harmless. But I felt the heat of his touch, the unspoken command. "I have something to show you," he said smoothly. I hesitated. "Damien." "Come." It wasn't a request. Against my better judgment, I followed him. He led me through the gala, past the glittering chandeliers, the murmuring crowd, until we reached a private balcony. The city stretched out before us, the lights twinkling like stars. I turned to face him. "What do you want?" His gaze locked onto mine. "I need you to understand something, Amelia." My pulse quickened. "What?" His fingers brushed against my jaw, tilting my chin up ever so slightly. "You can fight me all you want. Hate me all you want. But you'll never escape me." I swallowed. "That sounds like a threat." His lips curled into something dark. "It's a promise." I should have walked away. I should have slapped him, screamed at him, done something. But instead, he kissed me. And I let him. The kiss was nothing like I expected. It wasn't soft. It wasn't hesitant. It was dominant, possessive, a battle of wills between two people who refused to yield. I hated him. But in that moment I wanted him. My fingers tangled in his suit, pulling him closer when I should have been pushing him away. His hands gripped my waist, pressing me against the railing as if he wanted to consume me. I should have stopped. But I didn't. I kissed him back. And then, I shoved him away. We were both breathing heavily, the tension between us electric. His smirk was back. "Now that wasn't so hard, was it?" I wiped my lips with the back of my hand. "Go to hell." His chuckle was low, dangerous. "You'll follow me there." I turned and walked away, my heart pounding. But as I stepped back into the gala, I knew one thing for certain. I had just crossed a line. And there was no going back. I spent the next few days pretending the kiss never happened. I convinced myself it was nothing, just a moment of weakness, a lapse in judgment. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, Damien wouldn't let me. His presence loomed over me like a shadow. In meetings I could feel his gaze burning into me. In the hallways he brushed past me, his touch barely there but electrifying. Every interaction was laced with an unspoken challenge. I hated it. I hated him. And I hated the part of me that craved more. One evening as I was packing up to leave the office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dinner. Tonight. 7 o'clock. Your place or mine? I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. I knew who it was. I should have ignored it. That I typed back. Me go to hell. 3 dots appeared. Unknown number. I'll take that as your place. I groaned in frustration. Arrogant bastard. Determined not to let him get to me, I ignored the message and went home. But at exactly 7 o'clock my doorbell rang. I froze. Well, he wouldn't. The doorbell rang again. I hesitated before opening the door. Damien stood there, leaning against the doorframe, dressed in a black dress shirt with the top 2 buttons undone. He held up a bottle of wine, his smirk infuriatingly smug. You didn't answer, so I assumed you were playing hard to get. I folded my arms. I'm not playing anything. Go home. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. I huffed. You don't just get to invite yourself in. He turned, his blue eyes gleaming with mischief. And yet here I am. I sighed, rubbing my temples. Why are you here, Damien? He walked over to my kitchen, setting the bottle of wine on the counter. I wanted to see you. My stomach twisted at his words. I shook my head. This Whatever this is, needs to stop. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Is that what you really want? I swallowed hard. Yes. He reached out, his fingers tracing a slow line down my arm. Liar. My breath hitched. He was too close, his scent overwhelming, his touch burning through my skin. I hate you, I whispered. His smirk deepened. I know. Then he kissed me. And this time I didn't stop him. The kiss was brutal. A clash of teeth and tongues, a battle for control. My fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer even as my mind screamed at me to stop. But I couldn't. I was drowning in him, in the heat, in the tension that had been building for years. His hands gripped my waist, lifting me onto the counter. His lips traveled down my neck, his breath hot against my skin. This is wrong, I gasped. He pulled back, his eyes burning with something dark and possessive. Then stop me. I didn't. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. The next morning I woke up tangled in Damien's sheets. For a moment I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning. What had I done? I turned my head. Damien was watching me, propped up on one elbow, his expression unreadable. Regretting it already? He asked, his voice low. I swallowed hard. I don't know. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Liar. I sat up, wrapping the sheet around me. This doesn't change anything. He smirked. Keep telling yourself that. I ignored him and got out of bed. I needed to get out of there, to clear my head, to pretend this hadn't happened. But as I gathered my clothes, Damien spoke again. Stay. I turned to face him. I can't. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply watched as I walked away. But as I stepped out of his apartment, I knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. I avoided Damien for the next few days. I needed space. I needed time to think. But Damien wasn't a man who gave space. He started showing up everywhere. At work, he made sure we were constantly in the same meetings, his eyes never leaving me. At a coffee shop near my apartment, he coincidentally arrived just as I was leaving. At a restaurant where I was meeting a friend, he happened to be having dinner. It wasn't stalking. It was calculated. A game. And I was losing. Then one evening my doorbell rang again. I knew who it was before I even opened it. Damien leaned against the doorframe, looking infuriatingly smug. You're avoiding me, he said. I crossed my arms. I need time. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. I don't do waiting, Amelia. I swallowed hard. That's not my problem. He smirked. You're mine. You've always been mine. I glared at him. You don't own me. He cupped my chin, forcing me to meet his gaze. Then why do you let me touch you? My breath caught. Because I didn't have an answer. Because despite everything, I wanted him. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. The moments stretched between us, thick with tension, heavy with unspoken truths. Damien's fingers remained beneath my chin, tilting my face toward his as if daring me to deny what we both knew. That no matter how much I fought him, no matter how much I claimed to hate him, I was his. But I refused to admit it. I took a step back, breaking the contact between us. You need to leave, Damien. His smirk didn't falter, but there was something in his eyes. Something dark, something possessive. No. I clenched my fist. You can't just show up here whenever you want. He leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms. And yet here I am. I hated how calm he was, how unshaken. He had always known exactly how to get under my skin, to manipulate every situation to his advantage. And this was no different. Whatever this is, it needs to stop, I said, forcing steel into my voice. Damien took a slow step forward, his presence overwhelming. You're lying to yourself again. I swallowed hard. You think you can just control everything, don't you? His smirk widened. Not everything. His gaze raked over me, slow, deliberate. But you're already mine. My breath hitched. I hated that he was right, That I felt this pull toward him even when I knew he was dangerous. Even when I knew that giving in to him meant losing the last piece of control I had left. I shook my head. I don't belong to anyone, Damien. Not you, not this company, not anyone. His jaw tightened just for a fraction of a second. Is that so? Yes. I met his gaze, refusing to back down. And I'm done playing your games. Something in his expression shifted. The amusement faded, replaced by something sharper, something unreadable. Then he did something that caught me completely off guard. He nodded. Fine, he said simply. I frowned. Fine. If that's what you want. His voice was even, too even. I narrowed my eyes. You're giving up that easily? His smirk returned, but this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. I never give up, Amelia. A shiver ran down my spine. He turned to leave, pausing just before stepping out the door. But let's see how long you last without me. Then he was gone. And for the first time in weeks I was alone. I expected relief. I expected to feel lighter, free from the weight of Damien Wellington's presence. But instead all I felt was empty. For the next few days the office felt different. Damien wasn't hovering over me. He wasn't interfering in my work. He wasn't watching me with that smirk that made me want to both slap him and kiss him at the same time. He had actually backed off. And it was driving me insane. I told myself this was what I wanted. That this was my victory. Then the rumors started. I overheard them in the break room, in hushed whispers in the hallways. Damien was seeing someone else. A model. Blonde. Perfect. I scoffed when I first heard it. Of course he was. Damien never stayed in one place for long. He was always moving, always chasing the next conquest. But when I saw the pictures, them together, his hand on her waist, his lips at her ear, that same smirk he used to give me, something inside me snapped. I told myself I didn't care. I lied to myself. Because the truth was, I was jealous. And I hated it. That night I went out with Sophie and a few colleagues. Drinks flowed, laughter filled the air, but I wasn't really there. My mind was stuck on Damien, on those pictures, on the way he had walked away so easily, as if I had never mattered to him at all. I hated him. And I missed him. It was a dangerous combination. So when a man approached me at the bar, charming smile in place, I didn't hesitate. I let him buy me a drink. I let him flirt with me. I let him touch my arm, lean in close, whisper things in my ear that I barely processed. And then, a familiar voice cut through the noise. I'd step back if I were you. I froze. I turned. And there he was. Damien. His blue eyes were darker than I had ever seen them. His jaw was clenched, his hands fisted at his sides. The man beside me frowned. Excuse me. Damien's smirk was gone. In its place was something lethal, something dangerous. She's not interested. The man looked at me, waiting for me to deny it. I should have. I wanted to. But I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Because the moment I looked into Damien's eyes, everything else disappeared. The man scoffed, muttering something under his breath before walking away. I exhaled sharply. What the hell, Damien? He stepped closer. You were letting him touch you. I glared. So, it's none of your business. His jaw ticked. It is my business. I let out a humorless laugh. No, Damien. It's not. You walked away, remember? He leaned in, his breath hot against my skin. I never walked away. I swallowed hard. You were with someone else. His lips curled into a smirk. Jealous. I refused to answer. Damien reached out, fingers brushing against my waist. I did it to get your attention. My heart pounded. That's pathetic. He chuckled, low and dark. And yet here we are. I clenched my fist. You don't get to do this. You don't get to act like you own me. His fingers tightened slightly. But I do. I shook my head. No, Damien. You don't. His smirk faded. Then why are you still standing here? I had no answer. Because the truth was, I didn't want to walk away. And he knew it. That night I made a choice. I knew Damien Wellington was dangerous. I knew he was manipulative, controlling, arrogant. I knew that being with him meant losing myself in ways I wasn't sure I could handle. But when he kissed me in that dimly lit bar, when his hands gripped my waist like he was claiming me all over again, I didn't care. I kissed him back. And I knew I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. Damien's lips crashed into mine with the force of a storm. I should have stopped him. I should have pushed him away, told him that this was a mistake, that I was done playing his games. But I didn't. Instead, I melted into him, my body betraying every logical thought in my head. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me against him like he was afraid I would disappear. Like he needed this as much as I did. Maybe he did. Maybe, for all his arrogance, for all his mind games, Damien Wellington was just as caught up in this mess as I was. But it didn't matter. Because the moment his lips left mine, reality crashed back in. I stepped away, my breath coming fast, my heart slamming against my ribs. Damien smirked. "Still think you don't want me?" I clenched my fists. "This doesn't change anything." His smirk didn't fade. "It changes everything." I glared at him. "You think you can just walk back into my life and—" "I never left," he interrupted, his voice smooth, dangerous. "You just convinced yourself I did." I hated how right he was. I hated that, no matter how hard I tried to escape him, I always ended up right back where I started. Trapped in his web. But this time something was different. Because I wasn't just fighting against Damien anymore. I was fighting against myself. I barely slept that night. My mind was too full of him. His words, his touch, the way his lips had felt against mine. I hated that he still had this effect on me. And I hated that a part of me didn't want it to end. When I arrived at work the next morning, I told myself I was done. That kiss was a mistake. It wouldn't happen again. But when I stepped into my office, Damien was already there. Sitting in my chair. Waiting. I sighed, setting my bag down. "Seriously?" His smirk was infuriating. "Good morning to you too." I folded my arms. "What do you want, Damien?" He leaned back in my chair, watching me with a lazy kind of amusement. "You." My heart slammed against my chest. I forced myself to stay calm. "Not happening." He chuckled. "Oh, Amelia. We both know that's a lie." I clenched my jaw. "You're impossible. And yet you still want me." I hated him. I hated that he was right. But this time I wouldn't let him win. "I'm done playing your games," I said, my voice firm. He studied me for a moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he stood and walked toward me, stopping just inches away. "No more games," he murmured. I swallowed hard. "No more." His fingers brushed against my wrist, sending a shiver through me. "Then tell me, Amelia. What do you want?" I opened my mouth. Closed it. Because I didn't know the answer. Not anymore. The days that followed were torture. Damien didn't push. He didn't chase. And that made it worse. Because now I was the one thinking about him. Wondering where he was. Who he was with. If he was still waiting for me to break. I told myself I had won. That I had walked away. But the truth was, I had never been further from free. Then one evening I received a text. "Damien, meet me. One last time." I stared at the screen. I should have ignored it. I should have walked away for good. But I didn't. Because deep down I knew. This wasn't over. And maybe it never would be. The restaurant was dimly lit, secluded. Damien was already there when I arrived, sitting at a private booth, watching me with those piercing blue eyes. I sat down, my heart pounding. "What is this, Damien?" His lips curled into a smirk. "A goodbye. If that's what you want." I frowned. "Since when do you let me decide anything?" His smirk faded. "Since now." I swallowed hard. "You're serious?" He nodded. "If you want to walk away, Amelia, I won't stop you." I didn't know what to say. Because this was what I had been waiting for. My chance to be free. But instead of relief, all I felt was panic. As for the first time, Damien was letting me go. And I didn't want him to. I shook my head. Why now? His eyes darkened. Because I don't want to keep you in a cage. I swallowed hard. And if I stay? His jaw tightened. Then you stay. By choice. Silence stretched between us. A decision that would change everything. And in that moment I knew. I didn't want to walk away. I didn't want to fight him anymore. I wanted him. So I made my choice. I leaned forward, my voice barely above a whisper. I'm not leaving. Damien exhaled sharply, his control slipping for the first time. Amelia. I cut him off with a kiss. Because this wasn't a game anymore. This was us. And I was finally ready to stop running. Viv.